it is so liberating and so free to just, I call it cut the bullshit of like having to fake everything and letting yourself be the imperfect human that you are, because no one is perfect. There's a lot of factors that go into like why I try to live life that way. For me, I think it goes back to just overall living authentically and not shaping yourself for the benefit of other people. And by that I mean not like, I call it faking it till you make it. And I remember throughout high school, I would fake it till I make it constantly of just like, oh, I need to do extracurriculars. I need to spend all my time doing classes. I have to dress a particular way. I have to act a particular way. And it was really draining and tiring. And like in high school, it's kind of shallow. And a lot of people don't think it's okay to be vulnerable. And at least in my high school. And it tended to be like if you were open about like feeling anxious or if you were open about like depression, for example, it wasn't the most supportive. It was just like, oh, like you're over exaggerating. And growing up in a Mexican household, it was kind of the same thing where it's like, oh, you just deal with it. Like, oh, you're a man, so you don't like cry, or you're a man, so you don't like deal with your problems. You just deal with it. And then entering college was kind of a huge transition. Around the same time, I came out as gay to my family. And that was just one part of living authentically. But another part was learning how to be openly vulnerable. Before, I used to think like my anxiety was just stress, and I'd be like, oh, I'm just stressed out tests and stuff. But then it was more prevalent and like present throughout my life, even when like I wouldn't necessarily like should be stressed over things. High school, I wouldn't honestly even probably consider my mental health. A lot of the time, I would pent up my emotions, or if I was frustrated about something, I would just pent it up and be like, "Oh, it's fine. Like, I'll deal with it." Which most of the time just meant I would try to ignore it and then just like move on, because I was not very big on like conflict. And I think that in high school, it wasn't like direct like rejection or direct like, oh, you're a mess. It was more so like these subtle or covert forms of just like dismissal of like, oh, you'll be fine, or oh, like don't worry about it, or don't stress. And to the average person, like, well, yeah, because I also believe not other people sometimes can fix your problems, but it's nice to have that support. In high school, for me, it kind of was an internalization of also me thinking like my problems are not that like severe or they're not that important. And so it kind of led to me myself also just not prioritizing it and being like, oh, I'll eventually deal with it, whatever that means. And I'd be like, oh, I just have to prioritize school, or oh, I have to prioritize the orgs I'm doing, and like get involved in like four different clubs and stuff, which like now that I'm older I realize, oh, that's like a form of coping. But I think how it affected my mental health, it was like, it, I wouldn't say necessarily worsened my anxiety, because I would honestly say my anxiety has been more present in college, or that maybe just because I recognize them more in college. But I would say it definitely made life more difficult as a whole, in the sense that like even with like my super close friends, I didn't feel like support, and in that sense it was like I didn't feel like I could discuss like my mental health issues. And again, like I said previously, growing up in a Mexican household, it's like you don't talk about those things. I think another part of it is, at least in high school, is if I open the conversation about mental health, that would open up the conversation about my sexuality, which in my family, I wasn't out until my senior year of high school, or like when I entered college. So it's kind of like this combination of I can't be vulnerable because one is already frowned upon, but then also I live in a like semi-conservative family where being gay is also not like the most approved of thing. Anxiety manifests for people in many different ways, and I think most people equate anxiety to stress, or like to similar like physiological feelings of stress, and that's what I also thought for a long time in high school. But when like I was in high school, I would see my brother have like full blown like anxiety attacks or like panic attacks, and I thought, oh, I can't have anxiety because I'm not like that. When I was in college, I realized like for me, how my anxiety manifests even today still typically is like I call it the void or the pit, and it's like kind of like the I'm gonna vomit feeling, or like that knot in your stomach feeling. And along with that, it's like a lot of spiraling or overthinking. And I think that's another part of being vulnerable, especially in high school, where I thought I have to like hide, or I have to like not be like seen is probably not the best word, but like seen. Whereas in college, I kind of did a full 180 and was like, I want those meaningful relationships. And early on, I kind of started to learn to talk to people like, oh, you also have like trauma, or oh, you also have like anxiety, or like you also are going through your own shit. And I think first in my first year, seeing like, oh, people are also going through it and people are also open to talking about going through it was like life changing, honestly, because I was like, oh, I don't have to fake it. For me, my sexuality is honestly not a huge part of my identity in the sense that I consider it as a part of me. And I'm like, it's kind of like if you meet a straight person, it's like, okay, yeah, you like date a particular group of people, but like, okay, that's not like really who you are. That's just a part of you. Um, and even for me, when I came out, it was pretty casual. It wasn't like this huge major thing. It was just like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm gay. And they were like, okay. My parents were pretty accepting of it because they were like, well, we've been new, but so I don't necessarily know what started it, but like I think you said, I think it definitely was a very gradual process of, okay, I came out and it's like I didn't really have a series of steps. I didn't write down like, okay, I'm gonna do this and like, oh, today I'm gonna be more vulnerable. It was me making the very conscious decision to challenge myself and be uncomfortable. And I think there's like that quote where it's like, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. And I think another major part is having that growth mindset. And I knew in college it's like a time of growth. And as someone who wants to pursue like the mental health care field, I was like, well, how the hell are you going to care about other people's mental health when you like don't really acknowledge your own? In college, I didn't just want to know a bunch of people and like not really have a deeper connection with people. And I was again like very blessed to with the first two people I met in college. One of my friends I was friends with in high school, and she also came to UCSD. And like in the beginning, it was just me and her, and then slowly my roommates, and then joining my organization. I think that was honestly a pivotal moment was joining our like college student government and making those closer connections within our organization and like the mentor mentee system and having a mentor who I could go to a lot of the time. And he honestly became one of my best friends and motivated me a lot to be more vulnerable without like explicitly like telling me or without explicitly like encouraging me to do so, but more so like just seeing how other people could be vulnerable and how that motivated people. I kind of realized I also want to be that. Like I don't want to fake it till I make it anymore, and that I could be vulnerable and still be an inspiration to people and still like motivate people to like be the best version of themselves. I think one way I've grown is in terms of personality, it's I am very extroverted in college. A lot of people don't believe me when I'm like, yeah, no, I get really anxious in social like settings. Like I am very shy at first. I just again with like the faking it till you make it, I try to be extroverted and I try to push myself to meet new people because I do love talking with new people. But at the same time, and a lot of people are like, oh, I think there's a lot of people who are always extroverted. I'm like, no, I'm like, I'm so scared and shy at first I meet people, but I hate awkwardness. So I constantly challenge myself to try to initiate things because I hate the awkwardness. And if I do that, then maybe it'll go away. I think another thing in terms of just mental health is there's this thing called like growth versus fixed mindset. And I think throughout high school for the longest time, I had a fixed mindset of I can't actively do anything to help myself or this is just who I am. Whereas now in college, there's an acceptance of I've never been formally diagnosed with anxiety, but I've accepted that I probably do anxiety and that I have actively taken the steps to recognize how it manifests for myself because it is different for everybody. I went home 2 weeks ago and I actually, for once, talked about my anxiety and depression with my mom, and we both talked about because she's formally diagnosed with depression, and we had a vulnerable conversation. And I'm like, this is the first time I've talked about this in 20 years with my parents, and it's kind of made me closer with them. So I think that for me, at least, it was both the conscious effort of like I need to have these conversations because I know that if I don't, I'm just gonna feel shittier with my anxiety. Because I think that it's better to know and see the result than to not know. Seeing a lot of what I was experiencing internally kind of made me realize just how significant mental health is, not just for yourself, but also with your relationship with other people. For me in particular, it first came from like my family and seeing how mental health deterioration affected my brother and like my older sister and my grandparents and my mom. There tends to be a few different reasons why people feel the need to like fake it. One thing is like self um in self expectation, and I think that this is both good and bad in the sense that some people, and for example, academics may think, oh, I have to like only sleep 1 hour, I need to do all this, I need to get a 4.0 and blah blah. And what I think is those people, although I haven't met them typically, is that do you want to live life only prioritizing a number? And that was the first thing. And I told them, if you are so unhappy, because you clearly say you're unhappy, but you feel like they need to be like this perfectionist, then you should reevaluate that, and it's okay to not have it be a priority, like academics. And although it's kind of like weird to say that when like you're literally a student, but I think there's a balance that a lot of people tend to not find. And then in terms of like loneliness, because a lot of the time faking until you make it and loneliness is what I've noticed, especially at UCSD. That's the biggest thing I've seen, where a lot of the time people think, oh, I need to like join Greek life, and like, oh, I need to like conform to like how my sister or brotherhood and like how they all like certain things. I need to like that, or oh, I really want to like join this org, but everyone likes this thing, so I have to like act or behave a certain way. When I went to college, I immediately just told myself like I don't have time for that bullshit. And those people tend to say like, oh, I feel lonely. And in my relationships class, it's a psychology course, we talked about loneliness, and it's like how you can have multiple people around you yet you still feel lonely. And I come to realize for myself, it's like, oh, it's a qualitative thing. It's that if you want those deeper connections, you need to have that vulnerability. And to be vulnerable, you need to stop faking it. And you may not realize you're faking it. There are a lot of the times where even now today, I'm still like, am I really being genuine and authentic? And that's a whole existential crisis. But overall, I think that it's a matter of, for some people, they may really want to be in a friend group, for example, but they may not necessarily click. And I think for those people, it's okay. I think it'd be better to be your authentic self and be around people who genuinely love and support you for who you are versus faking it just to fit in when the quality of those relationships may not be what you want in the first place. I've had people ask me like, Isaac, how do you have so many friends? Or like, Isaac, how do you have so many like deep connections? And I'm like, I'm just me. I don't fake it. I don't like pretend I like certain things just for the benefit of other people. I try to speak my mind, and if I have an issue, I will be upfront about it, or I will try to resolve that conflict. And you kind of just realize your connections are more deeper that way. It's like there's not like a formula of like, oh, if you do this, this, and this, you'll get like this many friends. If you do this, this, and this, like you'll feel better. If you stop putting so much energy and investment in trying to be the person you potentially don't want to be, or be the person that really isn't you, then you will just suddenly realize you are so much more happier and so much more free. Because in like college, I would say this is the happiest I've been, even in those shittiest moments. When I think back to who I was in high school, and I'm like, I am not that anymore. And I am the person who I've wanted to be genuinely. Not for anyone else's benefit, not because my parents or my friends or anyone says like, oh, you need to be this, but because I genuinely am at a state where I'm working as the person the person I want to be, and trying to embody the core values that I say I want to live by. So I think that would be my advice, of just really kind of sitting with yourself and learning who you really are. Because I would think, even for myself, I don't fully know myself. I confuse myself every day. But really figuring out what are your core values, and what are the actions and like tangible things you can do to actually embody those core values rather than just saying that. And then once you start doing that, you kind of realize you're not faking it, you're actually living the life you want to live.
Thanks for watching. Hit the like button and comment with your thoughts and experiences. If you'd like to see more content like this, please make sure to follow @RealLifeVideos. Let's rehumanize.